Good morning. Subcommittee on the Constitution and Civil Justice will come to order. And without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recesses of the committee at any time. We welcome everyone today to this hearing. We're calling it the ultimate civil right, examining the Hyde Amendment and the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. And I would now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today we will hear testimony on existing statutory language prohibiting taxpayer funding from paying for the taking of the lives of preborn children through abortion. There is concern that the Obama administration or a potential Clinton administration may intend to reinterpret the plain and long-standing meaning of the Hyde Amendment. We will also examine today the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, which would protect human babies who are born alive. On this day in the year 2016, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, there are no criminal penalties in federal law for either negligently or deliberately killing born alive human babies who are living and breathing on the table after surviving an abortion. More than 7 months ago, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act with bipartisan support to protect these little children who are born alive. More than 90% of the American people support this kind of legislation. Yet we've been able to even get a vote or even a debate in the United States Senate to protect innocent, born alive babies from being deliberately subjected to cruel and torturous death. The people who came upon Kermit Gosnell's clinic in Philadelphia and discovered a horrifying scene and several dead babies, many of whom had been born alive before being murdered, were told by their supervisor that the investigation of abortion was not their business. This insidious sense had taken hold that if we're dealing with abortion in any of its aspects, we were dealing with a, quote, constitutional right, which overrode or trumped any local law that might protect the victims. Ashley Baldwin, one of Dr. Gosnell's clinic employees, said she saw babies breathing, and she described one as 2 feet long that no longer had eyes or a mouth, but in her words was making like this screeching noise, and it sounded like a little alien. The abortion industry has labored for all of these decades to convince the world that unborn children and born children should be completely separated in our minds, that while born children are persons worthy of protection, unborn children are not persons and are not worthy of protection. But those who now oppose this bill to protect born alive children suddenly have the impossible task of convincing themselves and the American people that a born, alive, premature baby that has survived an abortion is just a fetus that should be disposed of and not a little human baby, not a little human child, worthy of our protection as a nation. To any compassionate human being who has not invincibly hardened his or her heart or soul, an honest consideration of this absurd inconsistency is profoundly enlightening. And I would earnestly implore in this moment, in this committee, that the majority leader of the United States Senate, and I say this in the most personal of terms, asking him to hold in some form a recorded vote on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act in the U.S. Senate to provide criminal penalties at the federal level to prevent monsters like Kermit Gosnell from murdering innocent, born, alive, human babies. Now, President Obama vetoed similar legislation, President Obama voted against similar legislation 4 times before becoming president, and astonishingly now has promised in writing to veto this bill if it comes to his desk. And I'm told Mrs. Clinton holds the same position, but intends at all costs to avoid revealing that during the presidential campaign. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not abortion. This is born alive. Born alive. The American people deserve to know where candidates for president stand on something so foundationally intrinsic to the republic founded on these core principles that all of us are created equal and are children of God. The American people still deeply hold themselves to be protected of born children. And if those seeking the highest office in the land are in opposition to a bill that would protect born alive children, then the American people have a right to know this before the most important election in this century and in the last century, on which the core right to live contained in the Constitution of the United States itself hangs in the balance. Turning our backs on helpless, born alive children is not who we are as a people, and it is not who the United States of America has become as a nation. Yet it is one of the most crucial questions now upon us in this divisive moment in history, in this decisive moment of history as well. And the implication for this country's soul and future are profound beyond words. And so I thank the witnesses for being here, and I ask this morning that all of us just open our hearts to the truth. And I would now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cohen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is undisputed that the Constitution guarantees women in this country what I believe is the most fundamental and personal decision they will ever make about their reproductive health, whether or not to have children. And the Supreme Court made that clear in 1973 in Roe v. Wade. Court has repeatedly reaffirmed the Constitution's guarantee of this right, most recently in this recent June in Whole Women's Health Clinic versus Hellerstedt. There are people like Mr. Frank and myself who have strong opinions on the issue and diametrically opposed positions. And we will not change each other's minds today or tomorrow or probably ever. So why are we here today when the House of Representatives is in recess? 1 week from today marks the 40th anniversary of the Hyde Amendment. And the Hyde Amendment is a rider that's attached to appropriations bills that funds the Department of Health and Human Services. It bans federal funding for abortion services provided by Medicaid and other health and human services programs, with limited exceptions, and that was hard fought to get for mothers' lives or in the case of rape or incest. Medicaid, of course, is the primary public health insurance program for low-income Americans. And this makes me think back to a program I attended last Friday night where Gloria Steinem spoke. And Gloria Steinem spoke about the fact that controlling women's reproductive processes has been something that men have done for years and tried to do. And they've tried to control women, and they've tried to control people of different races and people of different sexual orientations because they liked the power they had and they wanted to keep it that way. And women have, in days of slavery, were very much encouraged to have children because that was good because you needed lots of more property to bring the crops to make the money. Then when they came along with the mechanization, they didn't need so many people, they started to think less of having children. But it was the people at the top, the people that owned the land and had the controls, determined a lot and wanted to continue to control women's reproductive systems. Poor women experience 5 times the rate of unintended pregnancies than more affluent women. 5 times more, with abortion becoming more and more concentrated among low-income women as a result. And women of color are disproportionately likely to be poor and rely on Medicaid for health services, health insurance, and this racial disparity is particularly true among women of reproductive age. Therefore, the Hyde Amendment, when you really look at what it does, it bans the funding for abortion services through Medicaid, denying low-income and minority women the ability to access a safe and legal reproductive health service. Perhaps the late Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, one of the greatest men to ever serve on the Supreme Court, put it most succinctly when he wrote in 1980 that the Hyde Amendment is designed to deprive poor and minority women of the constitutional right to choose, because that, in effect, is what it does. Simply put, the opponents of the right to choose cannot get what they really want, which is to repeal Roe outright. So instead, they've chosen to deny the right, as a practical matter, to poor women and women of color. Most Americans, whatever their views on the right to choose, agree that politicians should not be allowed to deny a woman health insurance coverage for pregnancy-related care just because she is poor, and this includes coverage for abortion services. The right to choose is well settled, and the amount of money a woman has should not determine whether she could exercise her fundamental constitutional right. You know, before Roe v. Wade, wealthy women could make their ways to Canada or Mexico, and they could get abortions, but poor women couldn't. Money's always been a factor. I'm a co-sponsor of H.R. 2972, the Each Woman Act of 2015, introduced by the dynamic and great leader, Representative Barbara Lee, who's in the audience and who has a statement which, with the permission of the chair, I would like to introduce and make part of the record without exception. Without objection. That too. Thank you for being here. And thank you for all you've done. When I was with Ms. Steinem, I asked her about her heroes, and you and Maxine Waters were right there among them. This bill, which Representative Lee has sponsored, would ensure, among other things, that federally funded medical coverage extends to all pregnancy-related health care services, including abortion services. The unjust burdens that the Hyde Amendment has imposed on low-income and minority women demand that Congress pass H.R. 2972. Mr. Franks, I don't know the poll, and I know that you can have polls of all kind of natures. I don't know if 90% of the people support this and how it was phrased. But I do know that about 90% of the people support no fly, no buy, and we can't get a vote on that in the House. And if you take some guns from people who are considered too dangerous to fly, you'll save some people's lives, for sure, people who are here today. But we don't do it. It's time to rescind the Hyde Amendment and guarantee that all women are able to access quality reproductive health care services and exercise their constitutional rights without regard to their socioeconomic status. I yield back the balance of my time.
And I thank the gentleman. And I would now recognize the full committee ranking member, Mr. Conyers of Michigan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I welcome the witnesses for today's important hearing. In Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court recognized a woman's constitutional right to make what is perhaps the most personal of healthcare decisions: when to start a family, free from undue government interference. Unfortunately, though, since 1976, Congress has sought to undermine this important constitutional right by attaching the so-called Hyde Amendment to annual appropriation measures funding the Department of Health and Human Services. The Hyde Amendment, of course, is named after a former colleague on the Judiciary Committee, Chairman Henry Hyde, which prohibits the use of federal Medicaid funds to pay for an abortion except to protect the mother's life or in cases of rape or incest. There are many reasons why this restriction should be rescinded. To begin with, the Hyde Amendment is a blatant example of political decision-making inappropriately interfering in women's health care decisions. For more than 40 years, Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land, as has been indicated. Yet it's clear that the Hyde Amendment's purpose is to undermine the Roe v. Wade constitutional guarantee of a right to choose to terminate a pregnancy by limiting low-income women's access to safe, legal medical care. Political people elected officials, most of whom are not doctors, have little or no business interfering in a woman's constitutionally protected private health care decisions in order to impose their own views about women's rights and health care. In addition, the Hyde Amendment has a disproportionately detrimental effect on the health of low-income women and the well-being of their families. According to the Guttmacher Institute, many low-income women lacking medical coverage are forced to delay paying their utility bills, rent, groceries even, for themselves or their children, to seek out financial assistance from relatives or friends, or to sell personal belongings in order to pay for an abortion. Moreover, women who cannot afford abortion procedures may in desperation resort to self-inducing an abortion or turn to unsafe, untrained, unlicensed practitioners, heightening the risk of injury or death from what is supposed to be a safe and legal medical procedure. Finally, the Hyde Amendment disproportionately affects women of color, which has been indicated. Medicaid provides medical coverage to 20% of women of reproductive age. But as a result of social and economic inequality tied to the persistence of racism in our society, 30% of African American women and 20% of Hispanic women of reproductive age are enrolled in Medicaid, compared to just 14% of white women of reproductive age. Clearly, the consequences of the Hyde Amendment disproportionately fall on women of color. While 15 states permit the use of their own funds to provide abortion coverage for Medicaid enrollees, 60% of reproductive age women enrolled in Medicare live in states that only cover abortion in limited circumstances. Rather than undermine the constitutional rights of low-income women and women of color, Congress should look to these states as an example and act to ensure that women, regardless of their financial situation, have access to quality, comprehensive reproductive health services. And so I am going to carefully listen to the testimony that comes forth, and I thank the witnesses for being with us today. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank the gentleman, and I will now introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Miss Gianna Jessen. Miss Jessen is an abortion survivor. Our second witness is Miss Genevieve Plaster. Miss Plaster is the Senior Policy Analyst at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Our third witness is Miss Kiera Johnson. Miss Johnson is the Executive Director at the organization URGE. Our fourth and final witness is Miss Arina Grosu. Miss Grosu is the Director for the Center for Human Dignity at the Family Research Council. Now, each of the witnesses' written statements will be entered into the record in its entirety. And I would ask that each witness summarize her testimony in 5 minutes or less. To help you stay within that time, there's a timing light in front of you. The light will switch from green to yellow, indicating that you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it indicates that the witness's 5 minutes have expired. And before I recognize the witnesses, it is the tradition of the subcommittee that they be sworn. So if you'd please stand to be sworn. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give before this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. You may be seated. Let the record reflect that all of the witnesses responded in the affirmative. And I would now recognize our first witness, Miss Gianna Jessen. And if you please turn that microphone on before you speak. Pull it up there close.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Pardon me. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I wish to appeal not only to those present within this chamber today, but to my nation. We are here to discuss infanticide. I am greatly troubled that this hearing is even necessary, and that such a law to prevent infanticide must be constructed in the United States of America at all. Many Americans have no idea that babies can even live through abortions and are often left to die. But this does happen. I know this because I was born alive in an abortion clinic after being burned in my mother's womb for 18 hours. My medical records clearly state the following. Born during saline abortion, April 6, 1977, 6 a.m., 2.5 pounds. Triumphantly, I entered this world. I added that part. Apart from Jesus himself, the only reason I am alive is the fact that the abortionist had not yet arrived at work that morning. Had he been there, he would have ended my life by strangulation, suffocation, or simply leaving me there to die. Instead, I lived and have the gift of cerebral palsy as a direct result of lack of oxygen to my brain while surviving an abortion. And cerebral palsy, make no mistake, is a tremendous gift. I don't know if any of you understand, maybe you do, what a tremendous honor it is to have to lean on the strong arm of Jesus all the way to heaven. It is my honor in a country that doesn't wish to speak his name. I will. So by the grace of God, in my case, a nurse called an ambulance and had me transferred to a hospital. That nurse saved my life, and I am profoundly grateful to her for this. Those who wish to justify such unspeakable evil, such as leaving a baby without proper medical care to die, have become masters of the manipulation of language, intimidation, and defaming their opponents to achieve their wicked aims. As a nation, we are continuously exchanging the truth for a lie. We have neglected our soul. And what will it take for us to awaken from our numbness and indifference regarding this? Will we ever awake? I am confounded as well by the passivity so often demonstrated by otherwise good and just men, by the fact that we must plead with those in power to give the most vulnerable infants among us even one moment of their attention. This is a bipartisan issue, and I think it is important for the American people to weigh at this hour whether or not they wish to elect someone to the highest office in the land that favors infanticide, because that is what we are speaking of here. A child, exactly as I was, that had the audacity to live through her mother's abortion and needed immediate and proper care. So I would like to ask Mr. Trump to tell me and you where he specifically stands on this issue, and I would ask the same of Mrs. Clinton. I would also ask Senator Mitch McConnell to force a vote on the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act before the end of this September. I have faced the consequences of our choices as a nation, as evidenced by my cerebral palsy. So if you choose to do nothing, I believe I at least deserve to know why you find this abhorrent practice tolerable. And I would respectfully ask that you tell me directly. It seems in some ways we have lost our way in this beautiful nation, but it needn't be so. We have only to remember that we are lent each breath, that we are all engraved upon the hands of God, and therefore cannot for one single moment be forgotten by Him. We need only to remember Jesus, who took me from my mother's womb to be His own. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jessen. And I would now recognize our second witness, Ms. Plaster. And if you turn on your microphone, please.
Chairman Franks, Ranking Member Cohen, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify before your subcommittee during this hearing on the ultimate civil right, examining the Hyde Amendment and Born Alive Infants Protection Act. My name is Genevieve Plaster, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst for the Charlotte Lozier Institute, a research and education resource in Washington, D.C. Today, I will focus on the Hyde Amendment and its measurable impact over the past 40 years. The Hyde Amendment is an appropriations rider that prohibits the use of federal funds for elective abortion or for health benefits that cover elective abortion. As a rider, it is not a permanent law, but it has been passed with bipartisan support in every federal funding bill since 1976. Amidst legal challenges in its early years, the Hyde Amendment was reaffirmed as constitutional in 1980 by the U.S. Supreme Court in Harris v. McRae. Though a financial policy, the most important measurement of the Hyde Amendment's real-world effects has not been dollars saved, but lives saved. By saying that the Hyde Amendment has saved lives, I am referring to the prevented abortions due to women deciding to continue their pregnancies and give birth to their children in the absence of federal funding. More than 20 peer-reviewed studies published in academic journals have found a reduction in abortion rates following the enactment of the Hyde Amendment or other similar laws. Numerous studies also examining state data show not only the abortion rate decreased, but that the birth rate has increased. In fact, the Guttmacher Institute, formerly Planned Parenthood's research arm, which in prior years received millions of funding from the business after still splitting with them, conducted its own literature review on the impact of the Hyde Amendment on abortion rates in 2009. Because the decline in abortion was so clear, even the study's authors were forced to acknowledge that, quote, the best studies found 18 to 37% of pregnancy that would have ended in Medicaid-funded abortion were carried to term when public funding was no longer available. We then rightly acknowledge that the Medicaid-funded births of these individuals are lives saved due to the Hyde Amendment. In a forthcoming study, the Charlotte Lozier Institute's associate scholar, Dr. Michael New, calculates the best estimate for how many lives have been saved by the Hyde Amendment. With a rigorous methodology, Dr. New identifies solid, appropriately designed studies that examine the decrease of abortion rates following the enactment of a public funding limitation. Finding the average of decrease to be 1.52, he applies this rate to state-specific data, namely the number of years and months that each state has had the implementation, as well as each state's abortion rate. The study's major conclusion is that the Hyde Amendment has saved more than 2 million lives since 1976. 2 million Americans. That's approximately the entire population of the city of Houston, the fourth largest city in the U.S. 2 million Americans is the entire population of the state of New Mexico. From another angle, the study also calculated that the Hyde Amendment saves approximately 60,000 lives each year. Among just the 7 states that each of you and your constituents call home, the Hyde Amendment has saved approximately 700,000 lives since its enactment. That is, In Arizona, 55,000 lives were saved. In Florida, 166. In Iowa, 33,000. In Ohio, 131,000. In Tennessee, 66,000. In Texas, the highest number of lives saved at nearly 250,000, 248,000. And finally, in New York, regretfully, no lives have been saved due to the Hyde Amendment because the state has had state-funded abortions since 1976 till today. This real-world impact bears repeating. In just these 7 states represented, 700,000 lives have been saved by the Hyde Amendment. From another perspective, CLI scholar Dr. New explains that we can also say 1 in 9 people born under Medicaid in a state that has a Medicaid-funded abortion, that does not have a Medicaid-funded abortion program, was saved thanks to the Hyde Amendment. Lest we lose sight of the qualitative reality of 2 million lives, let us consider a brief story of Claire, a young woman who experienced an unplanned pregnancy at age 17. And in a recent news article that was just published the other week, she said that at that time, I felt hopeless and alone. She explained that if Medicaid funding for an abortion had been available to her, it would have been very tempting to go ahead and have that abortion. Instead, she reached out for support, was accompanied to a pregnancy care center where she saw the first ultrasound of her young son and decided to continue this pregnancy. Now, a year later, Claire reflects, I don't know what I would do without him. That's my baby. Of the 2 million lives saved by the Hyde Amendment, one can only wonder how many other of the mothers are in the similar situation. In conclusion, the Hyde Amendment has enjoyed bipartisan support for 40 years, was reaffirmed as constitutional since in 1980, enjoys support from nearly 7 in 10 Americans, including even 51% of those who identify as pro-choice, 44% of those who are Democrats, 65% of African Americans, 61% of Latinos, and finally, and most importantly, has saved an estimated 2 million lives. For these compelling reasons, the protective language of the Hyde Amendment should not only be retained as enforced policy, but should also be codified as permanent law. Thank you for inviting me to testify today.
Thank you, Ms. Plaster, and I would now recognize our third witness, Ms. Johnson. And Ms. Johnson, if you make sure that microphone is turned on.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to speak about the Hyde Amendment, one of our nation's most harmful and shameful policies, one that singles out low-income women and interferes with their personal decision about whether to end a pregnancy. My name is Kiara Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of URGE, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity, and as a steering committee member of the All Above All campaign, a campaign led by more than 150 reproductive health, rights, and justice organizations united to lift the bans on abortion coverage. Safe quality abortion services should be available, regardless of a woman's ability to pay, her source of insurance, or where she lives. However, since the passage of the Hyde Amendment in 1976, the appropriations process has been used as a vehicle to systematically deny meaningful access to poor women, and has expanded to harm many others. As a result of the Hyde Amendment and its extended reach into similar restrictions, nearly 29 million women of reproductive age do not have insurance coverage of abortion. Each restriction, each ban, is intended by anti-abortion politicians to further their ultimate goal of pushing abortion out of reach for as many people as possible. For those who are struggling to get by, disproportionately women of color, low-income women, young women, immigrant women, a coverage ban might as well be a ban on abortion altogether. Studies have shown that restricting Medicaid coverage of abortion forces 1 in 4 low-income women seeking abortion to carry an unwanted pregnancy to term. The Hyde Amendment creates one of the most onerous barriers to abortion care. Just listen to the voices of those who have felt the impact of these bans. Kendall from Colorado says, "I found out I was pregnant, and I was deceived by the center I visited because it ended up being an anti-choice crisis pregnancy center. After that, I struggled for weeks to find resources, the last $200. I have been anxious, frantic, and terrified. My health has declined, and I believed there was little to no hope until today, when I was finally able to access an abortion." A second woman recounts, "Here's what it took for me to gather the money for my abortion. It was hard. It took 3 weeks. The payday loan I took out for my abortion wiped out my entire account. I got a 3-day notice on my apartment door, and things started to spiral out of control. And then, when I became evicted, I lived in a shelter temporarily." As a Black woman, I am outraged that the morally bankrupt Hyde Amendment has been permitted to persist for so long. It is a source of pain for many women and should be a source of shame for those who support it. The time for policies that visit indignity and deprivation on women, including Black women, is over. Last year, Representatives Barbara Lee, Diana DeGette, and Jan Schakowsky made history by introducing the Equal Access to Abortion Coverage and Health Insurance Act, the Each Woman Act. This bold legislation respects that each of us, not just some of us, should be able to make our own decisions about pregnancy and prohibits politicians from interfering by withholding coverage for abortion care. With this bill, we are saying that all of us should have access to the same coverage and options, independent of income, zip code, or source of insurance. This legislation now has more than 120 co-sponsors in the House and the support of the American people. Polling released last July shows that a majority of Americans would support a bill requiring Medicaid to cover abortion. A right without access isn't a right at all. In the Each Woman Act, I see the transformational power of centering the lives, struggles, and aspirations of those for whom the legal right to a safe abortion has not yet been made a reality. But that reality is within our reach. We can work together to build a future where women's decisions are treated with respect, and we can get the health care we need with dignity and compassion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And I would now recognize our fourth witness, Ms. Grossu. And if you make sure that microphone's on.
Chairman Franks, Ranking Member Cohen, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I am grateful and honored to have been invited to testify today in support of the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. In 2000 and 2001, Jill Stanek testified before this committee about her experience as a registered nurse, where she discovered babies born alive after an attempted abortion and left to die in the department's soiled utility closet. In 2002, Congress responded by passing the Born Alive Infants Protection Act, which was signed by President George W. Bush and is current federal law. It passed by voice vote in the House and with unanimous consent in the Senate. Unfortunately, incidents involving born-alive children being killed after an attempted abortion have continued after this law and into the present. Infanticide is unacceptable in a civilized society, regardless of what one may think about abortion itself. Up to 2010, abortionist Kermit Gosnell operated his dirty and dangerous abortion facility where he did hundreds of snippings of born-alive babies as part of his abortion process. The grand jury report noted, many of the women gave birth before he even got there. When you perform late-term abortions by inducing labor, you get babies, live, breathing, squirming babies. Gosnell had a simple solution for the unwanted babies he delivered. He killed them by sticking scissors into the back of the baby's neck and cutting the spinal cord. See, for example, the image of baby boy B, who was found in his facility. Federal and state authorities finally raided his facility, not because he was illegally killing born-alive infants, but because of his illegal prescription drug activity. While Gosnell's case was particularly gruesome, he is not an outlier. A former employee of current Texas abortionist Douglas Carpin described how he regularly killed babies born alive by snipping their spinal cords, fatally injuring them with blows to the soft spot on their heads and twisting their necks. She said, "I'm pretty sure I was seeing at least 3 or 4 large babies that were completely delivered in some way or another daily. When the fetus would come completely out, of course the fetus would still be alive because it was still moving. Of course you could see the stomach breathing, and that's when he would do this." Yet despite the gruesome photo and eyewitness evidence, Carpin was cleared in December 2013. The Center for Medical Progress, in its investigative videos, authenticated by an in-depth forensic analysis report, revealed a lot of evidence of babies killed after being born alive. For example, Perrin Larton, a procurement manager from Advanced Bioscience Resources, said, "The whole point is not to have a live birth. I literally have women come in and say they'll go into the OR and they're back out in 3 minutes. And I'm going, what's going on? Oh yeah, the fetus was already in the vaginal canal whenever we put her in the stirrups. It just fell out." Holly O'Donnell, a former procurement technician with STEM Express, recounted one incident where her supervisor said, "Want to see something kind of cool?" And she just tapped the heart and it started beating. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this fetus and its heart is beating. Data that the CDC collects also confirms that babies are born alive after attempted abortions. Between the years 2003 and 2014, there were somewhere between 376 and 588 infant deaths under the medical code P96.4, which keeps tracks of babies born alive after the termination of pregnancy. The CDC concluded that of the 588 babies, 143 were definitively born alive after an attempted abortion, and they lived from minutes to 1 or more days, with 48% of the babies living between 1 to 4 hours. It also admitted that it's possible the number is an underestimate. We know it's an underestimate because these are just the reported numbers from hospitals, not from the abortion facilities. Gosnell is only one abortionist who is responsible for hundreds of snippings of born-alive babies, yet he did not report even one. His numbers alone exceed the definitive numbers of the CDC. Even one baby born alive after an attempted abortion who was then killed is one too many. But we are talking hundreds of reported ones. Yet not one person to date has been charged or convicted under the current federal law. Due to developments in technology, babies who are considered extremely preterm can now survive outside the womb as early as 20 and 21 weeks post-fertilization. Recent Science Journal articles announced, with 67% surviving after receiving active care. Here, for example, is Lucas Moore, who was born at 21 weeks post-fertilization and 1 year later. Dr. David Birchfield, the chief of neonatology at the University of Florida, said, "It confirms if you don't do anything, these babies will not make it, and if you do something, some of them will make it." This is why we need the proposed Born Alive Act. It explicitly requires healthcare practitioners to treat born-alive abortion survivors with the same care they would treat any other born-alive baby and admit such babies immediately to the hospital. It provides enforcement mechanisms such as criminal sanctions and penalties to hold abortionists accountable for killing born-alive infants. And the bill also expressly excludes any prosecution of the mother of a baby born alive, and it gives her a private right of action to seek relief if the abortionist were to kill her born alive baby. The White House has promised that it would veto the born alive legislation, citing it would have a chilling effect. I cannot think of a more chilling effect than continuing to let U.S. abortionists commit infanticide. Born alive babies after an attempted abortion are already recognized as legal persons since the 2002 Born Alive law. The proposed Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act simply recognizes the obligations that follow from this reality to ensure that babies born alive after attempted abortions will be given the best medical care available and full and equal protection under our laws. I earnestly ask that you support this bill to stop infanticide in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grosu. The gentleman have a question?
Just a second. Mr. Chairman, I got to run to a different committee. I want to thank our witnesses.
Could I yield to the gentleman first? I think that there was a video that the gentleman was going to allow. Could I yield to I'll yield to the gentleman first for questions. We'll now begin our question time, and I'll yield to the gentleman first.
I have a question. I just have to be at another hearing.
Then would you yield for the video?
Oh, we yield for the video, sure.
All right. If you'll start the video there. Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Is this going to be part of the time?
Yes. Yeah, it's 5 minutes. The video's 5 minutes? The video's 5 minutes, and he's not going to ask questions. He's just yielded just 5 minutes to the video. If they get it right. What we'll do, I'll go ahead. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and suspend for the moment, and I'll recognize Mr. DeSantis for 5 minutes, and thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, I got to run another hearing. I want to just thank our witnesses, in particular, Ms. Nessie, for her powerful, compelling story. I got to run another hearing.
Thank you, sir, for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Johnson, the Born Alive Infants Protection Act of 2002 clarifies that infants who are born alive during abortions or attempted abortions are afforded all legal protections enjoyed by other persons in the United States. Would you support amendments to that federal Born Alive Infant Protection Act to protect infants born into these incredibly vulnerable circumstances by providing a requirement that abortion providers or their staff immediately call 911 for an emergency transfer to a hospital of an infant born alive at a clinic in those circumstances?
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm not a medical professional, and What I do know is that there are leading medical organizations that have come out in opposition to this bill. I know that there's been testimony that's been provided for the record, and I think, for me, yielding to their expertise is where I would go.
But why would you, to me, it's not a question of, if you have an infant that's born alive, we obviously had very powerful testimony. What would you lose by providing the infant treatment at that point?
We currently have laws that hold doctors to high standards of care in this country. So for me, I don't understand why we would necessarily need an additional law around this. But again, I'm here as a witness around the Hyde Amendment, and like I said, I think there's testimony around this.
Let's talk about the Hyde Amendment. Would you agree that from a policymaker's perspective, if there's something that you don't like and you tax it, you're likely to get less of it, correct?
I'm sorry, can you restate that?
If there's something that you don't like as a policymaker, cigarettes, let's say, and you tax it, you'll get less people to buy cigarettes, correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay, well, so if you tax something, you get less of it. You disagree with that. I think most economists would say that's correct. If you subsidize something, you then get more of it. Do you agree with that or no?
What I agree with is that women choose abortion services, and abortion...
That's not what I asked, though. I asked that by providing taxpayers subsidies for something, you're likely to get more of that, correct?
I'm not sure, are we talking about public insurance?
I'm talking about generally. So, for example, I think your testimony after listening to it, it seems to be that you're upset that there's not public money being provided for abortions. And to me, the takeaway from that is the policy outcome that you're seeking is to increase the number of abortions that are done in the United States. Is that accurate?
No,
But why would you not get more if you're subsidizing the conduct?
Women choose abortion as a part of their health care.
But that is a different question from whether the taxpayer should subsidize it. Yes, people have the ability to choose one way or another. People have the ability to choose to do other things in other aspects of life. The question is by putting the weight of the taxpayer behind something, you will inevitably lead to increases in abortions, will you not?
Well, the American public is in support of Medicaid covering a full range of pregnancy options.
That's not the question. I didn't ask what the American public is for. I'm saying what you're arguing, I just want to tease out the implication, is that you're effectively arguing that we need to increase the amount of abortions that are conducted in the United States.
We need to increase the ability for women to make the decisions that they want to make.
Well, the ability's there. The question is how you're going to apply the taxpayers' use of tax dollars. And I think that by not answering the question, I think you have answered it, which is effectively, under your testimony, you would see more abortions in the United States. And it's a difference between whether you can get one or not. I think most people, even people on either side of the pro-life issue, there's been a general consensus in society that we'd like to reduce the number of abortions in any way that we can. So one final question, just Ms. Grasu, before my time's expired. Ms. Johnson, now, she said she wasn't here to talk about the Born Alive, but she said, why would that be necessary? So I'm going to ask you, why would we need to do amendments to the Born Alive Act?
Essentially, thank you, Congressman. Essentially, there have been no prosecutions under current federal law. So the Born Alive Act, which passed in 2002, not one abortionist, not one facility has been convicted under this, although the CDC reports that there are at least 143 born alive infants after attempted abortions. So what happened to those infants? Were they given care? And so the question is, this bill, what this bill does is it requires and it creates an enforcement mechanism so that if an abortionist does not provide immediate care to a born alive infant, that abortionist is going to have to face violations and fines and criminal penalties for this. And it protects the mother, too, from any kind of criminal penalties.
Thanks. My time's expired.
I thank the gentleman, and I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to introduce for the record letters from 18 health provider organizations, different religions, different medical specialties, et cetera, and so, for the record.
Without objection.
And then I'd like to yield my time to the only woman who's here on the panel and can most appropriately ask questions on behalf of the majority
All 4 of our
population.
women, our panelists are women, of course.
I apologize, the
That's
most, on the congressional panel, and who represents the majority population sexually in this country, Ms. Chu.
Thank you, Congressmember Cohen. I appreciate the time, and please excuse me, I will have to leave right after this because I have to catch my flight back to Los Angeles. I want to thank Kira Johnson for testifying today and for bringing to light the negative impact that the Hyde Amendment has on women all across the United States. For 40 years, the Hyde Amendment has been used to deny a woman coverage for abortion just because she's poor. And because of social and economic inequality, women of color are even more disproportionately impacted. A low-income woman is able to use Medicaid for her health care needs, except in one area, abortion, due to the Hyde Amendment. Because of the lack of funds, she is crippled from making one of the most critical health decisions she could ever make, a personal decision best made by her and her doctor and not politicians. In order to pay for the abortion, she may forego paying utility bills, rent, or food, or sell personal belongings. But then due to the time she uses raising the funds, she risks delays and a more difficult abortion. If that does not work, she may in desperation decide to seek a dangerous, illegal abortion from an untrained or unlicensed practitioner. And if she cannot find the funds at all and goes on to give birth, she stands a greater chance of slipping deeper into poverty, finding no way out. Even though all American women have the constitutional right to an abortion, the Hyde Amendment is a law that objectively stops low-income women from being able to exercise their full rights. We must ensure that every American woman can access their constitutional right to an abortion. We must end the Hyde Amendment. Now, there are 15 states that have done this with a policy to cover abortion with state funds and who do so in practice. Women in these states are so fortunate because they can actually make decisions over their own lives. Unfortunately, this leaves the women who live in the rest of the 35 states with no alternative. But there is a bill in Congress that remedies this situation. Congresswoman Barbara Lee is the author of the Each Woman Act. Her bill would ensure that abortion coverage is available not just for wealthy women, but for all women. Her bill would ensure that the constitutional rights of all women is upheld. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill and to be one of 120 co-sponsors of this bill in the House of Representatives, all of whom believe that it is time for the Hyde Amendment to end. And I would like to ask Kara Johnson 2 questions. For one thing, there was a witness that said that the public supports the Hyde Amendment. However, it is my understanding that the public agrees that the Hyde Amendment should end and that a woman should be able to determine her access to health care and abortion services. That's question number 1. My other question is, under the Hyde Amendment, states are permitted to use their own funds to provide abortion coverage to Medicaid recipients. Of course, 15 states have chosen to do this. Do you find that in these states that use their own funds, women have overall better health care outcomes because of better access to family planning?
Thank you, Congresswoman. It is true. The majority of Americans support the lifting of abortion bans, including the Hyde Amendment, and they support that Medicaid cover a full range of pregnancy options, including abortion services. And when women have access to abortion, when they can afford abortion, the quality of life of women and their families improves. Studies are showing that. A woman who seeks an abortion but is denied is more likely to fall in poverty than one who obtains one. And I mentioned earlier in my testimony that the burden does fall hard on low-income women. Restrictions on Medicaid coverage of abortion forces 1 in 4 women, poor women, seeking an abortion to carry out an unwanted pregnancy to term. This also compounds other health disparities facing women of color and low-income women of color across the nation. And so the short answer is yes, we do see improved quality of life for women, but not just women, for their families and for their children and for their communities.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady, and I would now yield to Mr. King from Iowa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I thank the witnesses for your testimony. And I would start with, as I listened to Mr. Cohen's opening remarks, he said that women have an undisputed right to abortion, close quote. And that caught my ear because I dispute that. I dispute the decision of Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton. I dispute the rationale that they contrived to arrive at the decision that I think was preconceived, and then they created the legal rationale to get to their conclusion. And one of the rebuttals that I would offer for such a thing is that we know this: America was founded on the concept that our rights come from God. And when our rights come from God, how would it be possible that those rights would confer a right to kill a baby? And so I pose that question for deliberation, and I hope a lot of people across this country begin to think about the sacred nature of human life and about the moment that life begins. This right to choose being well settled is also a component of that opening statement, with which I disagree. It is not well settled. It has been a fight for 43 years, and it'll be a fight until it's over. But what we're seeing is 4D ultrasound, science expanding, watching babies move, burp, laugh, react to outside stimuli in the womb. The personalities that one can discern by seeing the ultrasound. I have a staff person in my Sioux City office, and I'll give you his name. He's State Senator Bill Anderson. On his bookcase, he has framed the ultrasound of his firstborn, and he knew he was a father when he saw that. I would turn first to Ms. Plaster, and you gave us some valuable data, I believe. And some of this data, I would ask this question: of the roughly, and I don't remember the number you gave us, but roughly 60 million abortions have been committed in this country since the Roe versus Wade. We're in that zone. If you have a more precise number, I'm happy to hear it. But I wanted to ask you, what percentage of those abortions were black babies?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I do think I have I think it's closer to about 55, 56 million abortions now since Roe v. Wade was decided. And to your question about how many of those, I can't say that I have it in front of me right at this moment, but I would be happy to easily look that up and provide it to the subcommittee.
I would ask you into the record if you would provide that information to this committee. Thank you. How soon do you think you could do that?
Today.
That would be excellent. And would your estimation be that if the black population is 12 to 13% of the overall U.S. population, would you expect that percentage of black abortions would be greater or lesser than the representation in the overall population?
Thank you. Studies have shown that it is greater, according to the CDC, and Guttmacher Institute has even more accurate information because the abortion centers give their information directly to Guttmacher. Many states do not have a mandatory law to submit abortion records to the CDC or their state health department. So according to Guttmacher, yes, it is African Americans are disproportionately represented in the abortions.
Would you have any idea why that's not being called genocide by the black community?
Thankfully, I know that there are good pro-life organizations, good pro-life black organizations that are calling attention to this. And I know that, for instance, Ryan Baumberger has done a great job in calling attention to this as genocide.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, if one were to be there at the delivery of a litter of puppies, and as a puppy was partially delivered, took a device and either crushed the skull or sucked the brains out of that baby puppy, would you be committing a crime in most states?
Hello. I couldn't speak to what's considered a crime with puppies.
Would, if I ask you to research that and come back to this panel with a response in the fashion that Ms. Plaster has promised, could you do that? Would you do that? I know you could do that. Would you?
I could, and I could also talk to you about the research and the anecdotal information I have about black communities.
But and I think that's valuable information.
I
not
would
the
love
subject,
to talk
not the
about black
subject of this
communities,
hearing.
if you'd like me.
But I'm asking you a specific question. Would you deliver that information to me? I've asked you if you believe that that would be committing a crime in the several states, and I'm going to ask you to answer this formally back to this committee. But I will tell you the answer, and the answer is yes, it would be. And the contrast is, as it stands, as you're advocating, you cannot do to a puppy what is now currently legal to do in America to a baby created in the image of God. And that's the center of this topic here today. I thank all the witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman, and I now yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been fascinating and subject here that I didn't realize was so emotional to so many people, both on the panel and in the audience. But let's start with you, Ms. Johnson, and I want to begin by asking you just to go over the impact that you think women of color receive and are affected by the Hyde Amendment itself. Could you do that for me?
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman. Women of color, young women, low-income women are disproportionately affected by the Hyde Amendment. The reality is that healthcare disparities exist for women of color, for people of color across healthcare issues, and reproductive health is no different. A lack of health insurance, a lack of affordability of healthcare, meaning a lack of an ability to even think about paying out of pocket, a lack of sexual health information, a lack of access to contraceptive services, in addition to stigma and shame, right, compounds these issues. And that means higher rates of unintended pregnancy for women of color, which means we have to make sure that a full range of options, including abortion, are accessible, because when they're not, particularly for low-income women of color, there is a greater chance of them falling further and deeper into poverty.
Thank you. How does the Hyde Amendment in your view, affect the quality of health care that low-income women receive?
The Hyde Amendment prevents women from even being able to make a decision about their health care. So yes, I mean, that alone, not being able to access, right, economically access the decision that you've made, the health care that you've chosen, of course that impacts the quality of health care. We just heard about, you know, how does this affect Black women and Black families and Black communities? The reality is that we cannot possibly think that helping Black women is going to happen by taking yet another opportunity to take decision-making away from them. That is not the way for us to support and respect Black women and Black families. Women of color want more access to health care, not more barriers to health care. They want more child care and affordable options of child care. Women want, particularly Black women, an answer to the high maternity mortality rates in our communities. And so the Hyde Amendment means adding, right, continuing, it means providing a full range of options for women so that women can make the best decisions for their health care.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. My last question is, how do you think legislators, we in Washington, are we best positioned to make decisions about a woman's health and well-being, and how do we get better at it?
Abortion can be a complex issue, and people have opinions. People have feelings, people have thoughts. Yeah. But however we feel about abortion, we should not deny poor women access to it because they're poor. So as legislators, creating ways that give decision-making back to women is a positive step forward. And decision-making around reproductive health and rights issues, right? When we're making decisions about whether to be pregnant and whether to parent, give us the space and opportunity to be able to do that with our doctors, with our loved ones, with our families, and in the context of the situations and circumstances we're in.
Thank you very much for your responses and for being with us at this hearing. I think this is one of the ways that we will become more thoughtful about the complexity of abortion and what it means to low-income women. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank the gentleman, and I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't be cheering today or clapping when I hear that basically the propaganda campaign that Margaret Sanger started, because she believed, she knew in her heart, will be better off if women who are poor or women of color are encouraged, pushed to have abortions, basically convince them to have genocide. It's worked. Of course it disproportionately affects women of color and poor women. That's the design of abortion. That's the design of eugenics. And I'd like to yield the rest of my time for a video.
So can you share more? You've adopted Heather and the events that led to that transformation where you ultimately completely rejected abortion. What was it that really changed your perspective?
I was doing abortions on a regular basis in my practice, and everything was just, the kids are growing, and I'm starting to make some money finally, and everything was just wonderful as far as I was concerned until June 23rd of 1984. June 23rd, 1984 was an absolutely beautiful day in Albany. Heather was exactly 2 months away from her 6th birthday. We took the kids to an amusement park that day, came home, we had dinner together, and the kids were playing in the backyard when we had friends arrive for cake and coffee. We were talking with those friends when at 7:25 that night we heard the screech of brakes out in front of our house. The kids had wandered into the road and Heather had been hit by a car. She was a mess. You know, I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to be able to save people's lives. My wife was an intensive care nurse at the time. This is what we did for a living. This was routine to us. But it made absolutely no difference, and she literally died in our arms in the back of an ambulance that night. You know, people who are listening who have children may think they have some idea of what that feels like. I guarantee you, if you haven't been through that yourself, you have no idea what it feels like. I pray you never find out. But what do you do after a disaster? You know, you bury your child and take some time off, and then you try to get back into your life. And I don't remember exactly how long it was after Heather died that I did my first D&E abortion, but I showed up at OR number 9 at Albany Medical Center just like I had over 100 times before. I wasn't thinking of this as anything special. This was routine to me, and I obviously had other things on my mind. And I started that abortion and put in what's called a Sofer clamp and literally ripped out a baby's arm or leg that big, and I just stared at it in the clamp. I got sick. I mean, I literally got sick. But when you start an abortion, you can't stop. When you do a D&E abortion, you have to keep inventory. You have to make sure you get 2 arms and 2 legs and all the pieces. Because if you don't, your patient's going to come back infected, bleeding, or dead. So I finished that abortion. I soldiered on and got it done. But I looked. I really, for the first time in my career, really looked at that pile of baby parts sitting on a table. And I didn't see all those things that had sustained me all those years. I didn't see what a wonderful doctor I was helping her with her problem, and I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't even see the $800 cash I just made in 15 minutes. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And suddenly this was looking really different to me. For the first time in my life, it hit me very powerfully that this woman had come to me figuratively, not literally. No woman ever literally says this. But figuratively, she came to me and said, here's $800, kill my baby. And I was the kind of person that would look right back at her perfectly calmly and say, why, sure, I'll do that.
After having that encounter and seeing that child and seeing it as a child, what was the process like to stop advertising for abortion?
Well, I didn't stop right away. I did a couple more, but these were just, I mean, I knew why I felt bad. I will get over this, but it didn't. A change had come that I couldn't take back.
So you tried to do a couple more to see maybe I can get over this, but you couldn't.
Exactly. So I went to my partners, and I announced that I would no longer do second trimester D&E abortions. They were just too difficult. And there were just 2 of us in the group that were doing them, so and this dumped the entire load on the other partner. But they knew what was going on. They understood. And I told them I would only do the little ones, the first trimester section D and C abortions we were doing in the office. And for a couple more months, I soldiered on doing those. But a change, as I said earlier, had come that I couldn't take back. When you finally figure out here, not here, that killing a baby that big for money is wrong, that it doesn't take you too long to figure out it doesn't matter if the baby is this big or this big or this big or maybe even this big, it's all the same. And I'm ashamed to say it, but it was February of 1985, it was that late after Heather's death, that I went to my partners a second time and said, I will no longer do any more abortions. And I haven't done any since then, and I never will. You never need late-term abortion to save a woman's life. If necessary, you accomplish the delivery. Now, did every one of those children make it because they were preterm? No, but they all had a chance, and most of them did make it.
You're back.
I thank the gentleman. You know, I'm going to recognize myself now for 5 minutes for questions. I've had both the privilege and the burden of dealing with this issue for a very long time. Because a long time ago, I came to a very stark realization that these were really babies. And if I believe that we are all created equal, if I believe that every child was a child of God, if I believe that every child was important, then it became important to me to try to do what was possible to live out that ideal of the Founding Fathers. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created equal and that every person would have a chance to live. And I don't know how this debate has developed the way it has, where Americans seem to be so at each other. Because we've been here before. A lot of times my friends on the left, they attack us for using the example of Dred Scott. But the reason that it is used so often is because it is so profoundly parallel. The Supreme Court comes along and says the African-American slave is not a person. And there were those who believed that wasn't true. There were those that believed that this was a human being worthy of protection. And they stood up and did everything that they could to do that, to change that. And finally, we changed. And now we look back, and there's not too many people that would argue that case anymore. They see the personhood. And sometimes when you finally see the humanity of the victim and the inhumanity of what is being done to them, somehow it begins to dawn on you. And I pray that somehow, when we're talking about born alive children, that a light goes on. That we realize, all right, if we're not going to protect born alive babies, then we have allowed ourselves to be dragged into that Sumerian night where the light of human compassion has gone out and the survival of the fittest has prevailed over humanity. And I pray that day has not come in America. And I heard a testimony today that gave me great hope, because Miss Jessen, you are living proof that when babies survive abortion, they go on to bring a loving, noble message to humanity. And I know you've said some things to our committee here, but I would just ask if you have anything else that you would like to tell America regarding the protection of babies born alive that have survived abortion.
Thank you, Congressman. I would like to thank you for being such a man of great courage. And I've been listening in the hearing today, after speaking, after explaining that I lived through an abortion. Often when I'm in the midst of abortion advocates, they never can answer this one question, and it is this: if abortion was merely about is merely about women's rights, then what were mine? And I've been listening to the great round of applause for the ending the lives of these children, but these very same people behind me applauding, I would like to tell you that if need be, I would lay my life down for you. Because no greater love has a man than to lay down his life for his friend. And so as I listen to you applaud for death, I want to tell you how valuable you are. And to America, I would say this: wake up. And, we are so worried about every single other issue under the sun. And we don't talk about this one. We're embarrassed by the social issues. We're embarrassed by the people that love God. And we are embarrassed by defending the most vulnerable among us. And we wonder why we have people killing each other. We have got our priorities wrong. We have abandoned God. We are embarrassed by him. And we will not remain free without him. So I would call on my nation to repent. What a word. We don't say that anymore. But I would call on my nation to that God would wake us up. That's what I would say. I don't feel it was quite articulate, but there you are.
Your message is heard in the context of your life, my lady. I would like now to begin a second round of questions, and I will recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and I appreciate all the witnesses being here, and I mean all of them. It is important that people have a chance to speak what they believe. As a former attorney and judge and chief justice, I look at the way the law in America has developed. Most of us think the Dred Scott decision was perhaps the worst decision in American history. How in the world could people prevail before our highest court in the land by saying these slaves are my property? I paid for them. I own them. The U.S. government has no right whatsoever to tell me what I can do with my own property any more than they can tell me what I can do with my own body. It's my right to own another person. And the Supreme Court, to their great shame, said, that's right. This is your property. The U.S. government has no right to interfere with what you choose to do with your property. I would encourage, Mr. Chairman, people who think Margaret Sanger was a hero to go back and look at the things that she advocated in the way of eugenics. She believed that people who were poor, people of color, were genetically flawed, and therefore it was a good thing to push them to have abortions. And if they couldn't be convinced, then, forcibly sterilize them. Because we need to be moving toward a higher plane of human being, not realizing that by what she advocated, she was bringing humanity down to the lowest possible level, the level of the animal kingdom, where you can kill or destroy if it suits you. So we've heard about the inappropriate intervention into healthcare decisions, and I struggle with the disparity in the argument that says no one should ever inappropriately intervene in a healthcare decision on behalf of a woman, and yet we will tell that same woman later in life, sorry, under Obamacare, you're too old to get a pacemaker. As the president himself says, we're better off just saying, take a pain pill, you don't get a pacemaker. It seems to be a disparity in thinking that we would advocate you can't intervene and say the life you're carrying, if delivered alive, even if you're trying to destroy that life, or as the doctor indicated, for late-term abortions, you pull one leg off, then you pull the other leg off, then you pull the arm off, then you pull the other arm off, and then as I've heard him describe before, you reach in with the clamps for something bulbous, and you have the skull, you rip that off, and as Mr. King was trying to point out, anybody does those things to a puppy, everybody in the country would be demanding they go to prison. But we have elevated this procedure to such a high level that the highest court in the land could say, hey, that baby's your property, you can do whatever you want with it. So I won't be cheering today. I will remain brokenhearted for my country and for the success Margaret Sanger has had in advocating for eugenics and genocide and this country's participation in what she hoped to achieve. I yield back.
And I thank the gentleman, and I now yield to Mr. Conyers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been an unusual hearing in a number of respects, but I'd like to ask Ms. Johnson just one question, because over the past several years, there's been a marked increase in the number of states passing targeted regulations for abortion providers, making it practically impossible, certainly a lot more difficult for safe abortions to occur. And other legislative measures designed to impede women's safe and legal medical care. Can you discuss the impact, in your view, that such laws have had on low-income women?
Thank you, Congressman, for your question. You're right. There are trap laws. Women have to often travel hundreds of miles because over 89% of counties don't have an abortion provider. There are also waiting periods which force women to wait additional days after they've already made a choice in health care. And the Hyde Amendment exacerbates the barriers that already exist for low-income women or any woman who is seeking abortion services. It's interesting that we're bringing up slavery in this space. When you own somebody's decision-making, you own them. When you get to decide for them whether or not their body has value, you own them. Whether you decide they're valuable as Black or not, you actually don't get to make that decision. We are valuable, and women are valuable. The Hyde Amendment simply says, set us free. We are not simple-minded. We are not being duped. Women are choosing to be pregnant and have children. The majority of women who have abortions are parents. They care. They care about their families. The Hyde Amendment is about increasing coverage of insurance. It is about returning decision-making back to women. It's about setting us free.
You think we should consider repealing the Hyde Amendment or move forward with other legislation since we're closing out this subject?
Yes. We should repeal the Hyde Amendment. There's a lot of support from the American people. As a matter of fact, there's strong support among millennials, among African Americans, and Latino voters in particular, with millennials supporting the Each Woman Act at 66%. African Americans supporting at 68%, and Latino supporting at 55%. So yes, I think we need to repeal the Hyde Amendment, and I think we need to pass the Each Woman Act, and the American people agree.
Thank you so much, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I thank the gentleman. And I will now yield to myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Grosu, I'll begin with you. Will you please talk about the ironic juxtaposition between the amount of medical care available to a premature baby who was wanted and a live premature baby who is the result of an attempted abortion and deemed unwanted?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For sure. I would first like to make a distinction, too, that abortion is not health care. Killing your own child is not health care, and American taxpayers should not be funding this. And there is no such thing as a safe abortion either. Abortion is a very dangerous procedure. Having said that, I will go to your question. Essentially, a premature baby now who can survive at 20 weeks post-fertilization, if given proper care and treatment, is able to make it. And this kind of care is being held in an incubator or being given oxygen, using a little infant oxygen mask, even being kept warm to maintain body temperature of the baby. These types of treatments are given to babies because a woman decides that she wants that child. So that child's value is dependent on another person's opinion of that child. So if the woman wants her child, that baby is going to be given the absolute best care that our medical communities have. And if that woman deems that she does not want that child is thrown in the trash, as we've seen time and time again, as Jill Stanek has expressed, as the videos, we've seen the videos that the child is taken apart and the baby's body parts are being sold on the market. And so we are asking, under this Born Alive bill, that abortionists be required to give basic, immediate care to a baby once that baby has taken his or her first breath. These are children who are outside of the vaginal canal. They are recognized as legal persons under our laws, and they should be protected.
Well, thank you, Ms. Grosu. I think that is the profundity of all of this at times for me, is that somehow, how do we separate the wanted child from the unwanted child? It occurs to me that if we say that child's unwanted, that we say nothing about the child. We say only something about those of us around the child. And if indeed we have come to the point where what gives a child the right to live and the right to protection is being wanted or unwanted, then all the dreams of the founding fathers are lost, and all of the things that those people out in Arlington National Cemetery died to preserve are lost, because America's founding dream was this notion that all of us were created equal and that these were rights given by God, that this thing was a miracle, and that to secure that right, that's the reason governments came about, and that it had its power from the consent of the governed. And there is no way to articulate the tragedy of losing even one little child, but I would suggest to you that something else is lost here, and that is that it's not the dying that leaves scars, it's the killing. And when we create this stone in our hearts and our conscience to where we are able to say this born alive child is only protectable if they're wanted. Do you understand where we come to then as Americans? Do you understand what's left? If we don't want to protect a born alive child, then who should we protect? If killing a born alive child is not wrong, then on what basis do we say anything is wrong? What protection do any of us have when as a society we harden our hearts to the extent that we will stand by and advocate and say it's a right to kill a born alive child and there should be no protection for that child? I do fear for my country. And I pray that somehow in the days ahead that our country will begin to consider who we are. I would call upon Donald Trump to say who he is on this issue, on the born alive protection. I would call on Hillary Clinton to do the same thing. I would call on the U.S. Senate to bring this bill up for a vote. Because if we are no longer committed to protecting born alive children, then it's time to board the place up that we're in and go home, because the battle is lost. And this ideal that all of us were created equal and are children of God has slipped from us. And I, for one, do not believe that. I believe that Americans are still protectors of children. I believe that America's best days are still ahead. And I believe that some of the testimony we've had here today is the most compelling I've heard in a long time. And I would just say to those of you that disagree, there's no hate in my heart toward you. But I would also say something that William Wilberforce said a long time ago. He said, and he was talking about slavery, he said, you can turn away, but you can never again say that you did not know. Today, you know that born alive children are dying, and there are those of us trying to protect them. And I only pray that somehow, that as it's happened in the past in America, that we come to a conclusion that, you know what, this is not who we are. And we still hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're all created, and that makes us a miracle, and that's worth protecting. So thank you all for coming today. That concludes this committee hearing, and I have a little script here. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And with that, God bless you all. This hearing is adjourned.